redirect the spotlight here a little bit.
I forgot we're down two commissioners. We're down.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the February 12th City of Morgan Hill Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and if we could start with a roll call, please, Gina.
Thank you. Community Development Director Jennifer Cameron. Here. Assistant City Attorney Cynthia Hassan. Here. Chair Downey.
Here.
Mueller.
Here.
Munoz Morris.
Here.
Tonda.
Here.
And Habib is not present.
Okay, thank you. Could you also declare the posting of the agenda, please?
Tonight's meeting agenda was duly noticed and posted in accordance with Government Code Section 54954.2.
All right, and before we announce it, if you wouldn't mind, all stand and we'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Joe, would you mind leading us?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Joe. All right, before I open the public comment period, can I just address the students at the back, if you wouldn't mind? Would you mind coming maybe more to the front, please? Maybe the first two rows. And if we don't have a natural stop, we'll stop around 8 o'clock and we'll sign your papers. But if you could come forward, please, and mute your phones. Wouldn't mind myself as well. Make sure my phone's muted. Thank you. I guess the first two rows didn't cut it, huh? All right. So, at the beginning of every Planning Commission meeting, we open for the agenda for open public comment. This is any topic that you would like to bring to the Planning Commission within the purview of the Planning Commission that is not on our agenda tonight. Jenna, do we have any speaker cards?
We have Rocky Garcia for the first item.
For the first item, okay, that's fine. Okay. Any other speakers on the open public comment? I don't see anybody rushing up here, so we'll close the public comment period. And commissioners, are we good with the orders of the day? Sure. Silence is yes. All right. Okay. All right. Let's move into our item number 1: regional housing need assessment, our RENA update, and pending housing trends. And Leslie, I think you're going to lead the presentation. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Very good.
Leslie Little, the Assistant City Manager for Development Services. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to really accomplish two things. It is not to necessarily be a problem-solving session or anything like that, but it's a first opportunity to introduce you to how our RENA reporting numbers look for the 2018 reporting year, and to point out the areas that we are still deficient in. And also then just to let you know that because of recent legislation, the things that we'll be reporting on when you see the actual final annual performance report on the general plan and our housing element, you'll see that it's an expanded data collection document. And I just wanted to go over for you what the state now will be collecting and what they will be reviewing and auditing us for. So I think that we begin with the first slide. Oh. Never mind, go up and down. There we go. So much for this guy. And I apologize for people in the audience that the table may be a little bit small, but we were trying to represent a lot of things on this table so we could talk about them briefly. I think what I'll do is direct you to the column where it says total, which is halfway through the slide, and the HCD, which is Housing and Community Development Percentage Met.
Leslie, would you take maybe 1 minute, maybe even for the students, what is RHNA?
I was just going to start
Okay,
that.
all right,
Yes.
go.
So RHNA, R-H-N-A, stands for Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And the state has a system where, for now years, through its housing element, it has formulaically determined what each city's fair share of housing is. They've gone beyond just designating the number of units that might be your fair share as a community. They've also determined in that gross number of units how many of those should be very low income, moderate income, et cetera, so that the state collectively would be able to meet the state's housing need. So we've been reporting to the state on our progress towards our RHNA numbers for a number of years. We get numbers for an 8-year cycle. We're 5 years into our 8-year cycle currently. This current cycle will end December of 22. And so the reporting that we're doing is on what kind of progress we've made to date, meeting our numbers and at income categories. So, since I'm just giving a little overview for the students, in the past, cities have been given their numbers on kind of a gross basis. Here's the goal, your fair share number of units should be, let's say in this case, 1,000 units. Our 8-year cycle, it's actually 928. In the past, we've always been given a goal, but we've never been held accountable to produce it at the different income levels. This has changed in the last couple of years, and so Morgan Hill has had to try to adapt quickly to try to meet housing goals by income level. So much of what we're going to talk about tonight is about how successful we've been and where we still have some needs to meet. So if I direct you to the middle column where it says total, it will show you that, or the column right before that, permits issued in 2018, it will show you in the 2018 column what we expect to be presenting to the city and presenting to the state on April 1st when our report for the 2018 year is due. Those numbers equate to meeting the needs by category of, if you look under HCD percentage met, in the very low income category, 26% of the need met. In the low income category, 109% met. In the moderate income category, 147% met, and the above market, regular market rate housing, 160% met. So I think one of the things to note is that our fair share number was 928 for this 8-year cycle, and 5 years in, we are meeting, we have exceeded that and produced 1,965 units at 212% of our fair share. You'll see in the first category, the very low income met, we still have 26 needed. We have 26% met, and that means that we have 201 units remaining to meet. In our pipeline, because we do RDCS, we happen to know how many units are going to be coming in the next couple years. We know that we have 86 units that have been pledged. What you have to remember about the pipeline is that it doesn't always mean that those units get built, and that's one of the places that we're always vulnerable, but we know that they're at least expected to come through the development process. If all of those units were built, we would still need 115 very low income units to meet all of our goals for the 8-year reporting period.
So can I just ask one quick question? Do I take it that you get no credit for overages in any given category?
You don't, and you are not allowed to carry them over to count towards next year's totals or in the next cycle. Okay. So for example, in 2023, we'll get a new set of goals, a new fair share. It may be 10,000 units, who knows? But if we had overachieved, as we have here, we don't get to carry those surplus units over into that cycle and get credit for them.
Yeah.
Tragedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's too bad.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is one of those areas that we've been trying to navigate as the law has changed. We haven't had a whole lot of ability to control the production of certain amounts of units at lower income because of the financial resources that need to go into subsidizing and supporting those projects. And that's one of the things that as we walk through this landscape with new state law and the governor's new budget proposal, funding some additional housing activity, foundations now stepping to the plate, also bringing resources to the housing program, we may be able to achieve in those categories at a little higher rate. But it will be a change for us to be able to try to meet all of these by income level. Historically, local cities' greatest source of affordable housing money was redevelopment, and the former governor dissolved redevelopment in 2011. So without those resources, Morgan Hill has been woefully missing, the ability to leverage certain affordable levels. I did want to point out that in 2017, the last reporting period, we were at 15% achieved for very low income and only 52% achieved for moderate income. So we've seen some significant gains, certainly over 100% in the moderate income category. So a lot of progress made in the last year and there. Wrong way. So just to prepare you for the March 12 meeting, at which you'll see the final annual report. By the way, your staff report says it's going to be the 26th, but we've moved it to the March 12 meeting. These are just a summary of the new data collection points that state HCD, is requiring in our new report. Previously, we've been responsible to report on building permit activity, and that was really the single largest data collection point. We now are going to be providing data on housing units and development for which any application has been filed and deemed complete. We'll be identifying sites required by the no net loss provision. The law now has a no net loss provision where a development has to be allowed to produce a certain number of units by density as a result of our general plan and zoning. And if in fact that...
Explain that a little bit. I don't...
So if you have a property where you've zoned it, or your underlying general plan and zoning permits 20 units per acre, but the project is approved at 10 units per acre, you have to find a way to identify where you're going to make up that other 10 units. So in the housing element each 8-year cycle, we actually identify sites and identify the methodology by which we think we're going to achieve our housing numbers. And it includes a component of what our density is and the number of units we think we can achieve on different sites. So this no net loss provision means that much to many people's chagrin, you really cannot require that you lose units for design. So, for example, you can't require additional open space that would threaten the yield of density on the site without making it up someplace else. Okay?
It's complicated.
It is. We also then will continue to monitor our annual building activity, and then progress in meeting our housing element programs and our general plan programs, and that's programs and policies, our down payment assistance, our BMR program, our home buyer education, a number of different goals and policies that are contained in our documents. Then we'll be required to report on the total number of units that are requested, the number of units that are approved, or for affordability category of all the units approved and denied, the number of units entitled, permitted, and certificates of occupancies issued on those. In the past, you were only required to report at pulling or execution of permits. I come in, I pull a building permit. The state found that there were a number of places where people would actually pull permits but then never build the units. So now we'll have to report also on certificates of occupancy. And then units rehabilitated, units lost to demolition, or any other kind of purpose. So it'll be quite an expanded report. Both Christy and Rebecca have a lot of detail work to do collecting the data, and we look forward to bringing it to you on March 12th. That concludes my presentation, if you have any questions.
Yeah, Leslie, sounds like you're doing just as well as I am. I have a couple questions for you. Thank you
It's
for
this building. It's the only place I ever have trouble is in this building. I don't know what it is.
You're not allergic to the planning commission by any chance?
I'm afraid so. She might, yeah. Anyway, thank you for the presentation. I had a couple of questions. I wanted to go back to the no net loss idea that you were introducing. So let's say we have a residential zone for, like you said, 20 units per acre. Are we saying that every project must come in at 20 units per acre in order to be qualified, or is there a formula used or a percentage threshold after which you have to start doing the no net loss calculation?
There's no formula been presented to us. There could be a number of tools that will be developed. I think the overall goal is that you keep track of units and make sure that you can make them up someplace else. Let's face it, any particular parcel could be constrained with, creeks or fault lines or things like that. We put kind of a gross layer of zoning over that parcel, and then you have to lay it out. So we would be required to kind of keep an accounting of where we weren't able to achieve a density and make sure we can make it up someplace else. No net loss also applies to demolition of structures. So if we have demolition of any housing structures that don't get replaced, we have to keep track of those or show where they've been replaced. So the state's going to keep pretty close watch on what our production looks like.
So when you're saying the city has to keep track of that in order to keep up, so I guess what is the target that we're keeping up with? The density that we've approved in the zoning, so that 20 units per acre is our keep up goal? So in other words, the incentive is to maximize density.
That's correct.
In every zone.
That's correct.
Okay.
And there's quite a bit of conversation now about further reporting as we get into our housing element in the next couple of years, probably starting in early 2020. We'll start updating our housing element. And there's a lot of talk about sites that didn't develop in the past needing to upzone for additional density. So we'll have to see what happens.
So the only other question that I have, and then I'll let the other commissioners speak, in kind of thinking ahead at our upcoming presentation on vacant land inventory, assuming maximum density in our residential zones, what does that put us at as far as number of units if we were to achieve 100% development? Do we have an idea of?
I don't know if John's done that number. I know that our economic development team has done that number for if we had maximum build out in our commercial and industrial zones as a function of our economic development program and whatnot. But we'll do essentially that same activity as we do our new updated housing element.
It seems to me, if I may, sorry, kind of contradictory to the notion that we're exceeding gross units requirements, yet we may be penalized for throttling back density, essentially, even though we're ahead of the curve.
It's a conundrum.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
May I ask
Thank
one
you.
follow-up on that? Is it gross acreage or net acreage?
I actually don't know if it's that well-defined. John, do you know? We don't know.
Because that would make a big difference, especially if you got natural landscaping features and other things that by law you can't build on, but yet they say we have to make up those units. That's...
I'm not really sure that the state, through its legislative process right now, is that finely grained. I think, we'll see that come from HCD with some rules as we move forward, and that they'll continue to be refined so that we all know what the definition is. Now we're just going to try our very best to follow the rules, what they are.
Okay, I have a couple questions, so let's leave. The first is to follow up on what the other commissioners had brought up, and that is this no net loss.
Mm-hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our RDCS is set up to balance things, including density, but also including open space and aesthetics and other things, often, I believe, at the cost of lowering the density in order to provide these amenities. Do you see that that's going to present a real problem, or are we going to have to change the RDCS to reflect that?
I anticipate we're going to be talking about doing a lot of those things as we move forward, because we want to try to keep RDCS as nimble as possible. So I believe those will be some of the considerations that we'll have to measure. And because we have the new rules, staff will look at those and test and help work through that with you. But yes, I believe we'll see lots of changes like that.
Can I ask a follow-on to that specific topic? I'll switch back to you again. I
Okay.
want to keep on the same theme here. So
now we're talking about RDCS rather than RENA specifically, so I just want to make sure we
I
don't...
understand, but
Okay.
my question is coming back to RENA, right? So in the scenario that Wayne just outlined, let's say you have a residential development of 20 units per acre. We build 10, which means you have a deficit of 10 per acre. Let's say it's 1 acre, so you're short 10 units. If you meet all your RENA numbers, this is an and you must make up as well, or
So
if
you have to
meet your
keep
RENA numbers,
track of them.
Is it neutralized?
You have to keep track of your loss, so to speak. If a developer came to you as a planning commissioner and said, I only want to put 2 units on this property that can yield 40, 10, whatever, it would be our obligation to try to increase that density. Otherwise, we'd have to figure out that there was a trade that we could make someplace else. Some other project would be able to, meet the needs and provide the density.
But is it a tracking issue, or you must make it up?
So in theory, you're supposed to identify where you can make up the units or where the units can be identified.
Okay, two more items in different areas. The first of those two is the consequences if you don't meet an objective.
So right now, the consequences are that you wouldn't get an approved housing element, that you may go on a cycle for your arena that is less than 8 years. It may be a 5-year cycle. We are already subject to every 2-year review or audit by HCD, because we didn't need enough of our affordable units. So we're on that kind of list like every other city, or most every city in California, where we were underproducing at our affordability level. And then there are some grant funds that you can't apply for. So if you're not meeting your RENA, there are certain things, certain programs you cannot access as a result. There had been some talk about potentially withholding and being punitive to cities, withholding their road monies. But right now, as we look at the landscape, we don't think that will happen this year, but it's a possibility. I think the new governor has set out a plan where he would like to try to incentivize affordable housing, and he's put a number of funding initiatives in front of us to help with planning and getting ready to build more housing. And his approach is to try to incentivize first before we start being punitive. That being said, there are some cities who are being sued by the Department of Housing Community Development or the Attorney General for noncompliance with their housing elements and for other performance issues.
Okay, this next question is kind of at a higher level. With the State Department of Housing, or Community Development, really entering the area that had only been a local jurisdiction's authority in the past, and that is local planning on how you develop. When the citizens of Morgan Hill say, as they had, we really want to retain that Morgan Hill feel. And some people report that the Morgan Hill feel is not a 3-story dense development. It sounds like in order to make our numbers, we really need to continue to do that, if not actually accelerate it. How do you see it? Is that a fair assessment? And actually it was getting to that Morgan Hill feel. The Morgan Hill feel to me was really lower density, 2 stories at the max. Not like we're building now, which, by the way, I really think what we're building now is great, but many people don't. So,
right. So most small cities who have cherished local control over their land use decisions are kind of facing the same issue that you've started to highlight here, which is that the state of California, my opinion, has squarely placed the housing crisis at the feet of cities. And I suggest regularly that the reason why we do not have housing production in the numbers that we need is because cities have kept their own local control over the past 2 years. And as we look at what's been introduced this session, there are no less than 13 bills pending regarding affordable housing and housing production that streamline processes, which is narrative for taking control away from our processes, and outright or ministerially permit some other things like ADUs and whatnot, or require that they be permitted in a certain timeline that won't respect what we do here. So we'll need to shift if, in fact, all of those initiatives are successful. I provided the 6-county compact, the CASA compact, which is a proposal that would basically start to mandate regional legislation about housing and housing production in the 6 counties of the Bay Area. All of those things, if they start to get implemented, would challenge these things. In the compact, as well as some of the pending legislation that has been introduced this session, there are measures that say around our transit station we have to permit 55 feet, for example. There's a measure that says in any kind of other transit corridor you need to provide a minimum of 39 feet in height, et cetera. So we're going to start to see those mandates. The ones I'm very concerned about are the ones that also give developers options to not comply with our local parking requirements, side yards, setbacks, design requirements, because then we really lose control of things like, having enough parking supply to provide for our citizens. So all of those things are on the table, and they've started to influence the way policymakers are working right now. Mm-hmm. You might remember from last year, SB 827, the Wiener bill was not approved, but it's been reintroduced as SB 50, and it will really champion a lot of the movement towards providing things at a much more dense level. The Morgan Hill Way, or the quality and the character and the culture of the community, it's going to be difficult.
I'm wondering, has anybody, to your knowledge, approached the city and chosen to go the state route, in other words, outside of the RDCS, and to demand moving ahead on a development?
We have the one example of the MLS project.
Okay. And that's a big
Housing
example.
Accountability Act.
And I'm just curious, what would prevent anybody else from doing that?
Well, first of all, they have to qualify with a significant number of affordable units. And there are a couple of other demonstration thresholds, but it's certainly something that we're concerned about, making sure that we have allocations available to supply all of the needs of the community, our market rate as well as our affordables. As you might recall, we're taking our 100% affordable projects outside of our DCS now as a result of the Accountability Act. So if we did have another 100% affordable project, we would bring that forward.
So the other law that's in play is SB 35 that you heard about. That's the one that would require over-the-counter permitting. We have not had any applications under that. That law also has a number of requirements that you have to meet, one of them being not being in a floodplain or a fire zone. And so that eliminates most parcels from qualifying for that. And that only requires 50% affordable to be included.
So in reading your presentation and the report you submitted, right, that we read, it sounds like, just based on preliminary information, I know it could change, but apart from all the good work we've done over the last few years, which is like, when you look at total numbers, we've like blown it out of the water, right? It doesn't seem to matter, right? Because you're still going to be, the net of it is, you're short in the category, at least 115 to 200 odd units, right?
So I think we have to wait and see what they're going to say about, we come up, 30 units short in one category. Is that going to be, is it a pass-fail? Is it, you came so close, plus you exceeded, and do you get some credit for that? I think we're kind of all flying blind about how we're going to be judged and graded.
Oh, there's nothing documented?
There's nothing, and it's not overt. It's, give us the data, we'll monitor you, we'll come up with some thresholds, and it may be that we also get compared with how we do with other cities.
And would you get a response though, right? That says either you passed or
yes.
failed, or you have...
Oh yes, no, they'll tell us how they grade us, just like they did a year ago when they said we hadn't produced enough to be on the star list. We were kind of on the bad boy list, but not the bad boy list. Do you remember this conversation?
Just one bad?
Just one bad.
Oh, okay. No.
But we were in the same bad list with 95% of the cities.
That's
in
exactly,
Vacant.
about 350 other cities up and down the state.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think some of the things they're comparing to, they're using the last housing cycle, which had a very bad housing recession or depression right in the middle of it. And that's not, I think, a typical one. This compact, though.
The CASA?
Yeah.
For those in the audience, CASA is the Committee to House the Bay Area, and it was a multi-county project that was spearheaded through MTC and ABAG, which is our regional council of government, to try to address the affordable housing crisis in the Bay Area.
Right. But it's also stating that they want to go to 35,000 housing units in the Bay Area per year, right? And what have we actually produced over the last few years? I didn't see that reference data anywhere.
I don't know if I can get you the reference, but I'd be happy to email you with the actual number. It's pretty deficient. That being said, as you said, we came out of a recession. The market then geared back up, and the market has shifted dramatically, so there are a lot of cities who have done a lot of different planning than they would have done in the past. And you may remember that in Mountain View and Emeryville and all up the peninsula, there are Belmont and Sunnyvale, there now are plans in place that would dramatically increase or permit the supply of affordable housing. Even Cupertino has a SB 35 project that would dramatically increase the number of units that could be built. So cities have gone through kind of a shift in market along with the dramatic job growth. They've started a re-examining where their jobs and their housing go, and allowed housing next to their campuses, their large corporate campuses, to help relieve some of the pressure. And so there's been a lot of other good housing activity that's been part of, I think, a long planning process that's moving forward.
But as I read the compact, it sounds like this is a compact in the 6-county area, which they want us to go to the state and say, look, we think we can do this if the state passes all these kinds of changes, right, that sort of enable things to happen, which are putting more requirements on it. My concern is one of their ones that they're really sort of plugging is like going after this bright red line that nobody's been willing to talk about, and that's a Prop 13 modification, right?
Well, the CASA Compact has a number of funding strategies, one of which could be a different kind of a split roll reexamination of Proposition 13. There's a sales tax, there's a head tax, there's a commercial linkage fee proposed, there's local revenue share of 20% from all the local communities from their general funds. The goal being to fund up to $1.5 billion annually for housing, both preservation, housing assistance for folks in need that need to stay in their units, and for new construction. It's a pretty ambitious plan. Legislatively, we provided something to you that shows that a number of pieces that I would call kind of facilitation bills have been introduced to help facilitate the CASA Compact should it move forward. Most local cities were not invited to that table when the compact was being reviewed.
Answered a question that I had, right? Because it was left off the document we got about who was on the steering committee and everything else. That appendix wasn't in the...
Yeah, city representation was one small city because one of the members of the MTC board is the mayor of that city. And then the three major cities, San Francisco, Oakland, San Francisco, and then San Jose, and then representative from the 6 counties, Alameda, Santa Clara, San Mateo, etc. Labor was at the table, a number of housing advocates, a number of private foundations, and large developers and housing advocates.
Okay, any other questions?
Maybe just one more, just a request. To make this real for anybody who may be listening, certainly for our students in the audience, when we're talking about a very low income to the 50% of the adjusted medium income AMI, what does that really look like, that unit? Is it a house, or is it an apartment? Is the rent, if it's an apartment, $500 or $3,000? So what's very low income?
Our Cracker Jack team over here tell you.
So it's an apartment for very low income, so for a
You turn
family.
on
Maybe
your-
you want to put
on
your
your microphone.
on?
So it would be an apartment for a very low income family of 4. Their income would have to be $66,500 or below
4 people.
for 4 people, yeah.
And what would that apartment rent for? Market rate?
Well, it's typically, market rate?
Yeah.
I mean, market rate.
That's a 3-bedroom apartment for a family of 4?
So, it would vary depending on whether there was a rent subsidy attached, but it could be anywhere from $800 to $1,500. So the way it works is if there's one person in the home, they'd be considered extremely low income if their annual income was about $27,000. If there's one person in the home, in order to be very low income, they're about $46,000 a year. Low income, about $66,000 a year. And typically we say folks, we like for them to not pay more than 30% of their total income towards their housing expenses. So if you have a rental subsidy or a Section 8 housing voucher, which some folks do, you may only be paying $300, but the subsidy that's coming from the housing authority may be paying the landlord $1,200, $1,300. So it's
I
kind
was
of
gonna say,
varies.
it's gonna be a lot more than that 300, because the market rate on a 3-bedroom apartment in Morgan Hill's probably close to $2K a month or more.
More like
Well, you may remember,
Huh?
for a 3-bedroom?
Well, if it's
Maybe more.
3-bedroom, it's probably well over 2,000.
Yeah,
3,000.
Well, be
3,000
careful,
easy.
you may be talking houses as opposed to apartments.
No, I'm not.
so you might remember in the West project, we had
But
this
we-
conversation
We do have an example, Diamond Creek is 2345
for a 3-bedroom.
well, it doesn't say.
That's actually
yeah,
1 bedroom.
Yeah, 1 bedroom.
It's a 1-bedroom,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's two.
Non-subsidized. Brand new.
Non-subsidized, so it's
2
closer to
bedroom.
3K.
Yeah, 2-bedroom, 2,600, 3-bedroom, 3,123.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right there.
Expensive.
A sad commentary.
May I?
Yes.
Sorry, one last question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Just very quickly,
one
then.
minute.
So,
Just remember, you can't ask these questions again on the 16th.
I promise, I
the
won't promise,
12th.
but I will do my best not to double up on my efforts. Assuming the overall trend that you said, that most municipalities have struggled with the very low, they're doing favorably with moderate and doing all right with, with low and then moderate, would it be fair to assume that RENA might adjust their numbers for the next cycle to address this trend? In other words,
No.
basically, no?
No, I can guarantee you now that there's a language written into the, a couple of the measures that were approved last year that require a complete reset of RENA numbers, and it also evaluates the number of people in your community now that need access to these units where there are no units being provided, a view of your community in terms of the number of service jobs you need in your community, and I cannot expect that, I anticipate that those numbers will go any place other than up. So we'll have a total reset, and it'll also include things like your jobs housing balance and whether you're a job-rich region, which we happen to be a job-rich region, not necessarily a job-rich city, but we are a job-rich region. So it'll be interesting to see what the formulas start to look like. So we still are contemplating joining a sub-region with the county. All of the cities in the county now have agreed to come together and join a sub-region so we can talk about how we meet these goals together as a county. So we'll see how that impacts us. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that we are working on a couple of 100% affordable projects that we have hope for in this cycle.
Right. Thank you, Leslie. I didn't open it to public comment, so I think I probably should do that.
Long Q&A.
We have at least one speaker, right?
Rocky Garcia.
And I see Mr. Telfer making his way up too, so. If anybody else wishes to speak, please turn in a speaker card.
Thank you. My name is Rocky Garcia. We're home builders and developers in Morgan Hill for over 45 years. And we're kind of really caught in a dilemma because I think the state has really perplexed our city and what they're doing with the arena numbers. My issue is very specific to a project that we have that we could add 13 ADU units, but because of the particular structure of the RDCS, those units won't count as low-income units, even though the city will be able to account those with the state. So we will propose that we wouldn't do as many ADUs, accessory dwelling units, as we would normally. In this particular project, we could do up to 13, which would help the city, especially in their low income, because some would be attached and some would be detached. I hope I'm making myself clear, but the other major issue that I put in my little letter is that I believe that this is a community-wide issue that we need to address. I think that I would like to propose that we get together as home builders and developers, the farmers and landowners, the city council, you as the planning commission, and most especially staff, and see if we can work this out together. I can remember probably about 10 years ago, we had a similar situation where we talked and we talked it through very well regarding the below market rate housing. It's our obligation as builders to build these units. And as we did years ago, we did it, and we met what the city was requesting and requiring. So again, I'm in a dilemma on our project that we are not getting credit for ADUs that would qualify as a below market rate house. And I have had discussions with Ms. Carmen and others. It's unfortunate the way it's set up now. It'll probably be changed. ADUs will help under the RENA numbers. Again, just to reiterate, I would like to suggest if Planning Commission could take the forefront on it, and let's get the community together, especially us as builders, to help out and solve this problem. Be more than happy to answer any questions, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
John Telfer.
Good evening. John Telfer with South County Realty here in Morgan Hill. More of a question than a comment. Regarding the no net loss, as my head spins, trying to see how that fits within our RDCS as we know it. If I take what Leslie had to say literally, it can't be required to meet maximum. So my question is, as we all know under the RDCS, many of the commitments, including things that actually lower our density, more open space, things that we do for points, etc., it's not required. Does that fall under that required statement?
So I think the conundrum that we face in Morgan Hill is that we try to take everything and put it into RDCS. State is not legislating for a community with a growth measure, and so I'm not sure that we have the answer for that. We've talked in general terms to this body as well as to the City Council about trying to get enough flexibility. Rebecca's going to take some additional language soon to the Affordable Housing Ordinance to kind of allow some additional flexibility, just so we can be nimble enough to be able to respond. So it's not an accurate response, but I think that's really the only way to put it. We're not sure yet exactly what it means. We're going to try to respond as best we can. HCD will tell us if we don't adequately respond, and then we have to try to fit it inside of our program.
Okay. Fair enough. Following up on that, though, the other question along the same lines would be, not every developer wants to maximize their density. Using that 20 unit per acre example, a developer may find that it's really a better project if he does it at 16 units per acre. Again, that's not something you required as a city. It's rather voluntary. So I would hope the state's going to have a little bit of understanding on that.
So that one I have heard discussed in different meetings with HCD. They view the city's mission to try to force the density. So they will be asking the community to try to maximize density. And so we'll have to see, what kind of direction we get from them.
Okay. My only comment would be I truly fear for the RDCS as we know it. It's made this community as special as it is, and this is a whole new game moving forward. It's very concerning, as I know you. I think looking at the expressions on your faces, this is being explained in the questions. It's very daunting. But thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Question for staff. So can you just explain, I'm not sure I fully understand Mr. Garcia's point about if he builds ADUs that they don't count. Why don't they count? How does that relate?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's a good point. Thank you, Mr. Garcia. So there's two questions. One is, can an accessory dwelling unit count with the state's RENA goals? And the answer is yes. The next question is, at what level will they count? In Morgan Hill, right now, today, we would count them as moderate income based on the rent survey that we did. However, moving forward, a developer can voluntarily assign a deed restriction, very low income, to help the city meet its 115 remaining goal. So that's very helpful. Sorry, there's 3 questions. So the third question is, does the accessory dwelling unit satisfy the city's 15% inclusionary housing ordinance? That is a separate question. I think it's a really good question that we could spend some time studying. What I don't think we can do is automatically say that an ADU satisfies the 15% inclusionary housing ordinance without establishing some minimum standards and design standards, because one developer may have historically contributed, I think the BMR average size has been 1680. So for nearly 40 years, we've been getting 1,600 square foot BMRs. Kaiser Marston did this entire study and said, okay, we're going to do a 15% inclusionary housing ordinance. Someone's either going to build or pay. But whether you build or pay, that's equivalent to 15% of your project. So why would another developer have the opportunity to contribute a 500 square foot ADU? So I'm not saying there isn't an opportunity to count them. There just needs to be some study to make sure all things are considered equal for, whether you're building or paying.
Okay, all right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand. I'm just trying to understand. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I think Leslie, any other closing comments? We can close it out?
No.
Okay, so we'll close out this item, and I think what we'll do is we'll take a 5-minute recess. Students, we're going to give you a whole 5 minutes back to your life. Come up here and we'll sign your papers. Thank you for attending. All right, welcome back. Next agenda item is our vacant land inventory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. John Beatty, Principal Planner with Development Services. I'm here tonight to give you an update on the city's vacant land inventory. In the not-so-distant past, the city decided that it would be helpful for everyone that was interested in the city's vacant land inventory to think about vacant land in terms of these 4 different categories that you see on the screen. Vacant and available are sites with no apparent constraints to development on at least a portion of the site, and the site has no entitlements that exist. Vacant and constrained are sites that have certain kinds of natural features like creeks or hillsides or serpentine soils or other things, in combination sometimes with other limitations such as access or restrictive easements that limit the availability of those lands to develop. Vacant and allocated or entitled are sites with 1 or more planning processes that have been completed already, but are still not under construction yet. And then we have a category called new projects, which may have submitted for something but haven't received their allotments or entitlements yet.
John?
Yep.
Go back one.
Go back.
So the last one. How come they don't fall into the first 3 categories? Why is it a separate category to be a new project?
Just to highlight that there's something that's active. So there's an active project that is being pursued. Someone's either submitted through the RDCS. Okay. So something is on the way to becoming vacant and allocated entitled. It's just a way of breaking down the 3rd item. I don't think when we initially came up with these categories, we might not have had that 4th one. It might have evolved out of people asking the questions, well, aren't they on file? And we had said, yes, well, shouldn't you differentiate? And so we did. Got it. The way we've presented our vacant land inventory has evolved a bit since I joined the city back 5 years ago. At one time, we had a very simplified presentation where we presented aggregate acreage numbers and broke that down by general plan designations and estimated unit yield by applying density to that acreage. In the example that you see on the screen, 185 acres of residential estate land, just on a very simple calculation, 1 dwelling unit per acre would yield 185 units. Kind of a very gross analysis. And then when we broke down the vacant categories into the 4 that we discussed earlier, and still applied the acreage, dwelling unit per acre factor to those, it didn't make a whole lot of difference. You could see here in this example, 183 units. It wasn't until we bit the bullet maybe and started looking at every parcel on a parcel by parcel basis, and then applied what we knew about that parcel in terms of its size, and then on the certain categories maybe looked at the constraints that we came up with what I think is a much more realistic but still probably conservative estimate of the unit yield. In this example, we went from here to here to here, and probably the biggest change happened in the vacant constrained category, where that kind of got lumped into other categories and was just estimate was produced based on that overall acreage. Well, when you start looking at some of those parcels which are up in the hillsides, have significant access constraints, really steep, serpentine soils. There are a lot of acres, but not really a lot of potential. So that resulted in a big drop in the estimated number of units for that particular category. And some of the others dropped as well. And if you look at the the table that we provided with the packet, it becomes evident why this occurs. Is you have some parcels in this residential estate category, for example, that are 1.5 or 1.6 acres, and if you add that with another 1.5 or 1.6 acre parcel, in aggregate, that's 3 to the acre gets you 3 units, but not really, because those individual 1.5 acre lots can't be subdivided into 2 units, so you'd only get 2 out of that. So we did some of that to clean up what we have today.
So John, what does it mean? What does it mean though if you have in this residential estate something under the VC category, right? Where you got a significant drop off there, right? From category 105 parcel by parcel 9, which means the majority of this stuff fell out, right? For some reason or other. Does that mean that is it counted as available then? If you could never build on it, would you count it or not count it?
Well, it's all counted, so we're not trying to hide the fact that these are still vacant properties. We're just trying to illustrate that the development potential on some of them, many of them, are not as great as we once had kind of implied by our grosser level of analysis. When you look at a parcel by parcel basis, there's 2 or 3 parcels in the residential estate category under vacant constrained that total about 75 acres or so, and really at most you could get one unit on each of those lots. One lot is almost 49 acres, one is almost 23, and the third is a little over 10. But if you dig into the reality of those lots, 1 or 2 of those may actually be constrained by an open space easement that was plopped onto that kind of remainder of what was a larger property that was carved out as part of a subdivision that lies lower on the hill. If that
at the northwest corner of the
northwest corner of the city. So if you look at sorry, I don't have the map, but I think we included that with our packet. There are 2 or 3 big yellow parcels in that northwest corner that kind of overinflate the amount of acreage that it looks like we have. I mean, those are big parcels.
They go up over the top of the hill.
But they go up to the top of the hill. And they're
the remainders
not
of the
developable.
old Davidson project years ago.
That's one of them, or 2 of them maybe are. Yes, Charles Davidson. Good memory there.
I think there's habitat constraints up there too, but
There are. A lot of that area is serpentine, which provides some habitat for, potential habitat for bay checker spot butterfly and other fun things. Where was I at? So your packet has more detailed information. This slide is just a partial summary of the residential vacant land inventory that we most recently updated in support of the city's October 2018 application to LAFCO for an urban service area expansion, which didn't involve residential properties, but they asked for the information anyway. Since the vacant land inventory update that we had last done back in July 2015, we have in total about 327 acres fewer vacant acres and about 1,200 fewer estimated units, which seems reasonable given how much the city has grown in the last few years, 3.5 years since we last did our vacant land inventory estimates. And we did, prior to the LAFCO exercise update, we did take a look at the vacant land inventory. I want to say it was at the request of the Planning Commission during some process that we were working on. We just never got around to finalizing that. Part of that process involved distributing some information to the Planning Commission, getting feedback. Also wanted to thank John Telfer for his help and local expertise in helping refine that list. So what we have today is pretty good, but it takes updating every so often, and the residential piece is pretty up to date, but probably could still use some refining since it's been several months since I last looked at this. And similarly, we did some analysis of the commercial industrial vacant lands, and this table and the table that's included in your packet, not the original table, but the supplemental table, show the amount of acreage overall, and then an estimated square footage yield of those vacant acres if you applied a average floor area ratio to the commercial and industrial. The two tables at the bottom show a breakdown of the amount of acreage of commercial versus industrial. And that's really all I have for you tonight. With the detailed information that we have provided, if there's anything that the Planning Commission finds needs to be updated in terms of moving something from one category of vacant to another, or taking it off the list entirely because that project is under construction, we've tried to do that exercise ourselves. But if you find something that needs correcting, feel free to let me know.
Question. I guess the one question, I think I looked at the one map and I thought there were two parcels over there that there were projects underway, like the Shoe Palace parcel.
Yeah.
The one right next to it?
I think you're right. I didn't create that map, and I didn't have access to the facilities for updating that. I have noted some things that need updating, so those are good catches. And we've been lucky in recent times to have had some projects come in on commercial industrial. The Evergreen site, that probably needs to be updated in terms of its category. It's still vacant, right, but it's got some level of planning entitlement.
Is GSA also building right next to the building they bought?
Yeah, on Butterfield and Butterfield. Jarvis.
Yeah,
yes.
I think that one was not shown either.
Yeah, that one should be updated. And then we had another project fairly recently on Butterfield Madrone that probably needs to be updated, and then some on Madrone Parkway closer to the shopping area. Yeah. So that definitely needs to be updated. But good, thank you.
John, so if I'm thinking back, I'm trying to understand the relevance of declaring acreage of what's deemed to be available versus not available. Well, like, for example, when we went through this LAFCO thing, what was that, a year ago or so ago, and there was all this assessment done of...
Good question.
Why do you need to, what's the word I'm looking for? To bring more land into the city when you've got all this available acreage. It's like, well, at a macro level, or macro level we do, but in reality, we really don't, right? So when you're asked to report how much available, is it raw acreage or usable acreage? Or how do you interpret? I'm trying to interpret this data saying, what's it telling me?
Yeah, so ever since I've been here, part of the purpose for keeping this information, and there are other purposes, but part of it has been to justify our requests to LAFCO for our urban service area expansions. But
the point being, you're saying I might have all this land, but in reality, this is all I can do with it.
Yeah. So what an example is, this screen doesn't show, but your summary sheet, I believe, does the average size of the available parcels of land, and part of our justification for the most recent request was that we didn't have enough land. It may look like we have enough land in aggregate, but we didn't have enough land on enough parcels that were, on a big enough parcel or enough parcels that were adjacent to one another that wasn't already spoken for through some other entitlement or, but that analysis didn't seem to sway the ultimate decision makers, and our request was denied based on the feeling that Morgan Hill has lots of land, because you drive around, you see vacant parcels here and there, but a lot of cases those are, and the reason we try to show these vacant properties in these different categories is to demonstrate that while they may be vacant, they may be spoken for, and the maps, at least the maps that we provided, certainly do get into the detail of the sizes of those parcels, and it wasn't enough to convince them that we didn't have enough, because you look at the bottom line totals here, you should have enough, right?
Thanks, John, for developing this. I have 2 questions, and then I do have an observation, what I was able to pick up from this information. The questions are back on the chart that shows the summary of the residential land. Yes, that one. For the entitled multiple family, 450 units, is that the M West project, or what is that project or projects?
It should be largely, yes, 389 or so of those units are the Butterfield Jarvis. That's got to be M West.
Okay, so those are the entitled are projects in the pipeline, and the new projects are ones that may be entering the RDCS shortly?
Yes, or have entered, but haven't, maybe they were awarded some allotments, but haven't gotten their entitlements yet.
Then
No, I take that back. No, you're right. They may be about to go through the RDCS process.
Okay, the second question I had was the constrained. Now, I recall a few years ago when we were having one of our several debates with LAFCO, that we were pointing out that even the land is available doesn't mean it's for sale. Is there anything in here that suggests that certain things can't be sold, or is the assumption is everything that could be developed that's available, that's vacant?
No, in talking with some of our development broker community members, some of the constraints are unwilling developer constraints. I would say most of the constraints are of the other kind of constraint, the natural constraint or the physical constraint.
I got you. So on our page 75, where there's another column that John shows the single family and multiple family available and constrained. And maybe you have that slide?
I don't, but it's basically taking these.
That's correct. The top 2, which is making the assumption that even though people may not want to sell, that they will sell. And this reports, I think at maximum density, that 1,121 units could be built.
Well, not necessarily maximum density, but what we believed would be on a parcel by parcel basis, the number of units that could be built on the site, based in large part on the density, but also looking at other factors, if there are other factors that limited the amount of developable area, for instance. So some of these constrained sites are so big, but they might have a piece, So we actually went and measured how big the piece of that constrained property is that's available for development and applied some density factor to that to come up with a theoretical or estimated unit yield.
Okay, so here's my takeaway, that when we consider what you just described for available and constrained units, you have an estimated 1,121 units, 1,100 units that could be built.
As of last fall. Yeah.
In a sense, not to make it dramatic, before we run out of land for residential. Okay. And 1,100 units divided by 200, we have about 5 years left. If on the other hand, areas like the downtown or others that are exempted, which go beyond the 215, come in, we may have an average of about 300 units that kind of spike up, that somehow get qualified, and we're then down to about 3.5 years of growth, 3.5 RDCSs, and then we could get to close up shop because there's no more land to develop. Not to make it over dramatic, but it just seems to me that this is really important as we look at the options. And one would be, well, we just slow down the rate of development to something less than 215 a year, and maybe take it down to 50 or so. But even there, with the affordable housing initiative that just was described to us, we may not be able to control what gets developed and doesn't get developed. So it may occur even without the RDCS. So I think then you have to look at several options. One option is that you take the residential land and you rezone everything as much as you can. All of these estates and all the feathering kind of gets set aside, and instead of 1 unit per acre, you have 20. That's an option, not necessarily a good one at all, but a possibility. The second would be you take a look at your commercial and industrial land, and in particular on the commercial side, you take a look at it and you take a look at what could be changed in designation and ultimately zoned appropriately for residential. And the third is you expand the urban service area. And what I get out of this is there needs to be some discussion about that, because the time is right now that we should be planning for what strategy to follow, and to get the other stakeholders who are so much involved in what happens in Morgan Hill on board as well. LAFCO may inadvertently almost be causing Morgan Hill to have basically no growth, because we're going to run out of land for growth. And maybe that would be good, although it then goes into their policy. If you have 5 years or less of developable land, you then qualify for consideration of an expansion of your urban service area. It seems to me we're there now, unless, again, you take a look at the commercial area, and I underscore, I'm not suggesting any industrial land gets rezoned, but on the commercial side, maybe what would be strategically a good thing to do?
That was the premise of my question earlier, right, which is, who gets to determine how much you really have? You say, for example, representing the city or planning commission, I have 5 years left, because you're applying a lot of very detailed logic to that, right? LAFCO says, no, you don't. You got 600 acres. You got 15 years left. What's your problem, right? So who decides, right? You know what I mean? So, well, it seems like it does seem like LAFCO. But that's my point being is, you know, there is a difference of opinion about how much we really have available.
Well, that was my point, though. If there are a gross 600 acres left, if you combine everything, combine commercial, industrial, residential, there's a big chunk. But to take it down at a city level where the general plan has identified how it's going to be divvied up, and you just take a look at residential, you know, you don't have that. If we were to reconsider this, it really triggers, I believe, a whole GP update, after which you could then take a look at zoning, you know, non-residential land. But in just, you know, we're headed there right now based on this, and maybe a thing is to send this to whomever would have an interest, and let them critique it all they want. And maybe the numbers get refined, but in the process, everybody could agree on one set of numbers. And how we use our land then becomes the issue, how you use the land in Morgan Hill. Personally, I think some of the areas that maybe are commercial, maybe you really should look at some open spacing, and maybe you find a way to put in a park or so. I don't know. That is far beyond the RDCS. That's a GP issue. But
I think it may be tough, but it may be possible to get some agreement on vacant land and figuring that out. Where we might run into some additional challenge is with the idea of redevelopment or conversion. So I think a big part of at least previous arguments against urban service area expansion requests was that the city has a lot of low density development that exists today that may or may not be occupied, but that could be redeveloped, theoretically redeveloped at higher densities. So that was a suggestion during previous hearing that maybe the city doesn't have a lot of vacant land within its inventory within the existing city limits, but maybe together with redevelopment or conversion of existing jobs lands, something that we may not want to do, probably don't want to do. That was part of a previous argument, which makes it really tough to argue back.
Except they can set up and say all they want on that, but the economics of that will drive it, right? And
right.
I mean, if you're talking about owner-occupied housing and trying to displace a bunch of people, and especially if it's in the sensitive area that I believe has been identified, which is south of San Pedro or Dunn? South of San Pedro on the west side or east side of Monterey, right? A lot of people live in there. You'd have to jack the housing way up beyond probably what is acceptable to the community, just because you'd have to replace everything that's there, in addition to getting new above it to justify the, one, you'd have to replace it and then build new above it, way above it, to get the economics to even work out, to tear out all that housing and displace a bunch of people and then build it back. It's, you know, it's, Cupertino and other places north can do that real easily, right? Because they got a lot of the infrastructure to support it. It's very difficult down here. If I could ask one sort of other question, and that is it a really difficult task to try to explain how LAFCO looks at the land and what it is and how much land we got? How do we compare this to the numbers their staff comes up with?
Well, their staff doesn't come up with numbers. They take the numbers that we give them and then they use them however they see fit, whether they believe them or not, or they don't have a set methodology for how to do capacity analysis. It's just a piece of information that they request during these kinds of applications, and in the end, it was pretty obvious to me that some commission members don't even bother looking at the details. We put in quite a bit of work to try to present a good argument, try to explain, this vacant land inventory analysis has evolved over the last few applications that we've had to try to better explain where the city is at now and where the city could be in 5 years, that magical 5-year number. But in the end, it doesn't really matter because they have a different bar that they use, my opinion, a different bar that they use to evaluate our applications, and it's not a bar that is defined. So it keeps, we think we know what we need to provide, and then we try to provide it, and then it's not enough, so we try to do better the next time, and then the bar goes up here, and then we try to meet that next level, and then the bar goes here. So, yes, if we, in the future we have such expansion requests, we'll need to provide this information, and we'll try to make it even more clear that the city has limited available lands within its existing boundaries. But it doesn't. I don't think it matters. I don't think it'll matter.
And you don't think it matters that a independent third party's perspective of that, as opposed to the city's perspective, would help?
Who would be that third party?
Somebody else.
Somebody else, a third party. Yeah. It's obvious.
Mr. Chairman, it could be you.
I'll do it.
Do it.
John, I got one other question. I just thought of it again. How did you treat the mixed-use area in Cochrane Commons?
I think it's in here. Let me see.
You thought you'd get away with that.
Memorize the stuff? John, you don't memorize the stuff?
I do. I'm just pretending that I haven't memorized it all.
Oh,
So
okay.
that would seem weird.
It's probably in the detailed tables, but I
Yeah.
can recognize as parcel numbers or something.
Joe, you didn't
I
read
don't.
that page?
I don't either.
Because it's a lot of it by APN.
If it's missing, we should. It should be included, but that's.
I don't know
That's
that
weird.
it's missing.
Yeah.
I just,
Well, some of those numbers may also shift, like if we wait 30 days, some of them may shift off from new project to,
yeah,
so.
yeah.
Oh,
I mean-
when this was last updated in 2015, that was before the GP update changed that corner of their property. I don't know if that map reflects that or not, or if the table does, but I'll definitely look at that. And we should have more information soonish about what might go on that property as a new project or a.
Right, John. All right, I think if there's not, I'll open it up for public comments. Is anything, are you concluded, John? That's it? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Very, very, very helpful, thank you. Do we have speaker cards?
Doug Muirhead.
If anybody else wishes to speak, please come forward, guys. Hand up a card. Mr. Muirhead?
Thank you, Chair.
Good evening.
Good evening, Commissioners and staff. For the record, my name is Doug Muirhead. I live in Morgan Hill. The chairperson just asked the question, raw acreage or usable acreage, and Commissioner Tanda wants just one set of numbers. So this is an excellent question and an excellent answer. The first land availability study I saw for Morgan Hill was the Industrial Lands and Southeast Quadrant Market Study from December 2006. Many have appeared since then in support of local development or to justify annexation requests for LAFCO. What would be useful would be to sit down with LAFCO staff, preferably in public, and see where you are in agreement and where differences in interpretation leads to disagreement. Back in September 2013, for the LAFCO application for Monterey south of Watsonville, the city claimed that the LAFCO methodology arguably overstated the city's supply of vacant residential land. They said LAFCO staff had previously argued that land should be considered for conversion before annexing new lands into the city. The city's vacant land inventory showed an ample supply of commercial and industrial land in the city. However, the city said it needed to maintain an ample inventory of non-residential lands to ensure a stable jobs housing balance, as well as a solid supply of employment-generating lands. In March 2016, for the LAFCO application for the Southeast Quadrant, LAFCO staff, using the city's information, prepared a vacant lands inventory that described the current supply of vacant land within the city's existing boundaries. The city had indicated that not all such vacant land was available for development for various reasons, one of which was that lands are constrained by natural features or the landowner is unwilling to sell, develop the land. At that time, 799 acres of land designated for residential development within the city limits was vacant. However, only approximately 31% of the vacant residential land, roughly 250 acres, was considered by the city to be available for development. Based on the land's existing residential zoning designations, up to 4,626 units could be constructed on the 799 acres of vacant land. Up to 2,223 units could be constructed on the 250 acres of vacant land considered by the city to be available. The city stated that most residential projects build between the low end and middle of the allowed density range. Using the middle of the various density ranges, approximately 1,500 units would be built on 250 acres of vacant land available for development. If you want more on LAFCO analysis, I recommend Appendix X from the March 2016 SEQ hearing. I also recommend Mr. John Telfer's letter analyzing potential sites for the December 2018 application for the private high school as one example that attempts to provide context for particular site evaluations. Without some clarity, we might well continue to have what Mr. Telfer described as underqualified and or disingenuous individuals attempting to mislead with inaccurate statements. That is the worst case. Better but still problematic is some way to accommodate the never sell or develop position when in the real world economic conditions change and people die. Never say never. I would love to see us, the city, and them, LAFCO, become we. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other speaker cards?
John Telfer.
Good evening. John Telfer with South County Realty. First of all, I'd like to highly commend staff and John Beatty for the job he's done here. This is not easy. The last speaker, I'm sorry to say, just does not understand all of the moving dynamics to this. And I think staff has gotten as accurate as possible. However, I question why we have a description of vacant and available. Not all of those parcels are available. There's a number of them, and I know we don't have time, but I could go through them with you tonight, and those are not available. So I'm simply saying we maybe need to change the definition of that category, because it misleads. Now, I realize that for purposes of accounting for RENA numbers and everything else that goes into it, it probably does suffice. However, on your last agenda item, if we're looking at reality moving forward, what's actually going to be available for development, it misses the mark. The numbers, unfortunately, are much worse than what this shows as far as available land. I think Commissioner Tonda's comments are pretty close to spot on as far as the timing, possibly 5 years. The solutions, none of them are easy, but when you combine what we're dealing with here with your last agenda item, we have some really heavy lifting to do if we're not going to be in violation of the state requirements. I guess the cynical side of me will approach this as I did high-speed rail, which is I never believed that it would get built. I don't know, it's just me, my intuition. I just thought at some point it's going to fall apart, and probably most of you have heard today that Governor Newsom is pretty much removing the high-speed rail from the equation. Again, the cynical answer here is this emergency that the state is pressuring cities like Morgan Hill to do, it will also go away. Unfortunately, it's going to take another great recession to do it. When the economic engine of Silicon Valley changes, as it will, it's inevitable, all of a sudden this emergency will go away. What I'm very concerned about, and I know we're getting off subject a little here, is that we don't overreach to try to please the state. I realize they have a huge hammer, but we can really ruin Morgan Hill if we try to overreach here. And this is not a permanent solution, a permanent situation or emergency we're under here. And I'd like to think that we're going to try to hold the course as best we can, as you all have through the years. Thank you.
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
So, coming back to you said that the realistic availability is a lot worse than this. What are you basing that on?
Again, the vacant and available number, if we're looking at that for reporting purposes, I think it's fine. If we're looking at it, however, realistically for meeting the new state requirements, many of those that are called vacant and available are not available.
But they're vacant, not available.
Yes. I do understand a little bit better after hearing John Beatty's explanation, for instance, on this, and I use this map, this is what I live and breathe every day, right? This kind of a presentation or this kind of an exhibit. Parcels 19, 14, and 17, I said, why is he including those as vacant and available when each of those 3 parcels actually have homes on them? And as I heard John Beatty's explanation, it makes more sense to me from an accounting purpose. That's because those are large lots, and the zoning would technically allow you to subdivide those lots and build more than that one home. However, reality is, it's not going to happen. Many of these smaller parcels that you see scattered throughout the Jackson Oaks, Holiday Lake, up in the Glen Eyre, Castle Ridge area are very similar. They're just not going to account for the numbers.
Just to be devil's advocate, I mean, John, I mean, you're one of the experts in town here. It's hard for me to question you, but like to say that it wouldn't happen, but you don't actually know, right?
No, I won't say it won't happen. I think it's unlikely to happen.
Okay.
Okay,
So
did I say won't? I'll
So-
retract that. It's very unlikely to happen. Now, I've been wrong before, and I'll be the first to admit it. And I made 2 mistakes here, when was it, Joe, 5, 6 years ago, when I first brought this concern I had about future inventory to the attention. 2 parcels I considered to be unavailable.
Now have homes on them.
What's that?
Now have homes on them.
Well, not quite yet, but the 2 I was going to point out are number 66. I call it the Arcadia site. As you know, Rocky Garcia is now going to be doing a project there. I considered it to be not available because after about 20 years of trying to free it up, it pretty much gave up on it. So kudos to him. It helps us with these numbers, certainly. The other one is the green sites, 93, 95, basically the John Fry property, as you probably know, has finally, at least the industrial portion has closed escrow, and the residential, I think, is shortly to close. And so those were not counted as expected to be part of our equation. They are, which is great news for this housing cycle. It's the next one that I worry about. I think we're going to make our numbers fine in the very low income and all that by the year 2022. It's the next cycle. If this remains the same, we can't make it. Your only solutions, I think, are as Commissioner Tonda pointed out.
Well, I was thinking of the 2 sites up on the north side of Cochrane, which were, for a long time, there's 3 narrow parcels there.
Yeah, I was involved with
that. Not available.
They were not, they were shown as available on my chart because we were under contract for development. There's still 1 remaining there that may change. To Liam's point, everything is subject to change. However, parcel 76, for 20, maybe 30 years, multiple people have attempted to make that property available to no avail. Will it change? Yeah, it could change tomorrow. Again, if history is any indication, it's unlikely to happen, I think, in this housing cycle, again, to 2022.
All right. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rocky Garcia.
Just again to reiterate what John said, I really appreciate it. Yes, we are working very diligently on the Arcadia site. It's the balance is about 70 acres, and under the gross acreage, it would be 5 units to the acre, which totals over 300 units, and we hope to achieve somewhere close to that. The only issue that I kind of bring up to Planning Commission is that there's an economic situation here. We will go through another recession. It usually happens every 10 years, and it will slow down for a while. And the absorption rate for large single-family homes, like we hope to build on the Arcadia site, don't sell as fast as the smaller, lower-priced condos. So the absorption from our standpoint as a home builder will probably be in the 30 to 40 units a year, which means it's a 10-year project. And I think that we need to put those kind of things, in the equation when we figure out our absorption rate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioners, any other comments before we close this topic?
I did, and it would be, first of all, to reiterate my thanks to John, staff, Jennifer, everybody, to provide this update, this information I think it has, for me at least, done what I thought it would, and that is that the city really does have a sort of gorilla in the room, maybe several gorillas. But one is just having to do with the available land that the city has and how you're going to use it. And obviously, that maybe just defined planning, but ours is very real. The land is going to be absorbed on the residential side in the coming years, either through an RDCS project or no RDCS project if the state and those applicants who follow those rules decide to take a different course. And I think it's important enough that there should be some type of process where we think through this and how we're going to make adjustments if adjustments are appropriate. I don't know how that maybe would be done, but that's what I'd like to just offer to staff. Take that offer to the commission, I suppose.
We're already starting to strategize with how we'll be moving forward on a new inventory for a future housing element. This is all running along that same path of working within this vacant land inventory and how we're going to have to look at meeting our arena needs in the future. We're also waiting for those numbers. And we can go with absolute worst case scenario and then get started, or get a little more realistic on what those numbers might actually be. Leslie's very tied into the subregion process. I think we'll have some idea. I think you were saying maybe in 2020 what those numbers may end up being.
Yeah. And John, can I just make one observation as well? First of all, really good work. I can't? Okay, never mind that.
Sorry.
I'm just kidding.
Absolutely.
I would sort of reiterate as well, I think it's difficult enough. I think we need to be a little bit more precise. This is my feedback on, I really was homing in as well as what Mr. Telfer said on just pure labeling and definitions sometimes of what's vacant versus available, what's not available. And I think if we got a bit more precise, we might have a better argument when we need it, if we need it, right? Like, for example, just because something is divisible, right, like a large site that has a house in it, it could be divided. I wonder if the granularity of categorizing that more could suit our argument if and when we need it, right?
Absolutely. I welcome those kinds of comments. And as Mr. Telfer was talking, I was thinking about just that, about potentially breaking the constrained category into maybe two categories, because it's really two different things. One is the natural or physical constraints, and then there's the other constraint that Mr. Telfer was talking about the probability of development, or developer not in town, owner not in town, land banking, that kind of thing. Maybe that's a way to differentiate the constrained category. And we're always welcome to take another look at the other categories available, et cetera, to see if, mostly available, to see if some of those fit better in a different category. And maybe that's easier if we have a second constrained category.
And even it sounds like the way you explained LAFCO, which is, it seems extremely subjective. Thank you for all the information, John, but I'm going to ignore it, I'm just saying, strengthen yourself as much as possible by saying, well, even though we might say this is our subjective opinion about what's available and not available, or our semi-professional, professional opinion, I'm saying we should strengthen our case as much as possible and say, even though that land over there shows as being available, the likelihood of building on it is like 0, right? And that's just an opinion. They can disagree with it, right? But
absolutely, and I think that was really my point, is that we present the information that they request that we think will support our application. They could do with it whatever they want. I mean, we could try to be as compelling, as convincing as we think we can be, but our job is to present the information, the data, and along with some narrative about why we think it supports our request. They could do with it what they want, and they have. I didn't mean to suggest that none of them actually looked at the fine data. I think, in fact, probably their focus was on the gross level data, and it just seems like there's a lot. But when you look at it in more detail, maybe there isn't. But for another time.
All right. All right, thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we have item number 4? 3?
3.
3, right? Which is, sorry, my computer went to sleep here. Okay. Item number 3, our proposed master street tree plan for the city of Morgan Hill. Right?
Good evening, Commissioners. Anthony Ulo with the Community Services Department. I know you've been up here a while, so you may have missed the news that a wire fox terrier named King was declared best in show today at the 143rd Westminster Dog Show. I bring this up because dogs, of course, like trees.
I was looking for the connection. I'm glad. Okay, I get it now.
I was going to get there.
Very good.
It was either that or sometimes we feel like other agencies treat us like a dog. But, that's one of the I could go either way. So, about 18 months ago, we wrote a grant application for the state of California to CAL FIRE, and it was to develop an urban forest management plan. And that management plan is going to be looking at all aspects of the urban forest, both privately and publicly owned trees. And we're also planting a bunch of trees. And if you've driven down Butterfield Boulevard lately, you may have noticed almost 200 oak trees planted in that area. We did a planting of specialized bikes in cooperation with them. We did some on some private property. And those of you traveling down East Dunn will note 6 new trees in the median a little bit east of Butterfield Boulevard. So we're working all around town. One of the aspects of the work has been specifically a master street tree plan. And throughout this effort, the person doing most of the work has been Christina Raby, who's working on our team this is her emerging professional career. She got her college degree and she's joined us. And so she's going to present the item and tell you all the work that went into developing the draft master street tree plan that you have before you tonight.
Great. Thank you.
And I promise to stay right here. So.
Okay.
Yeah, he can't move. Hello, thank you for having me.
Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. So I will just quickly go over the process that I took to create the master street tree plan that you are looking at. So what I did was I utilized our original street tree plan, and that helped me to create a comprehensive document that includes the most suitable and least suitable street trees for Morgan Hill today. And so I really utilized 3 different websites to get the information I needed. And so the main one I used was the Urban Forest Ecosystems Institute at Cal Poly website. And this website helped me to look for classifications such as height, foliage, soil tolerance, and root damage ratings on trees. And then the second one I used was the water use classification of landscape species list. And this website helped me to find the most drought tolerant species as well as native and non-native species. And then lastly, I referenced the California Invasive Plant Council website. And that one just helped me to ensure that I wasn't putting any invasive species on our master street tree plan. And then I also included it in our prohibited street tree list. And so after I got all that information together, I worked on the original map that the street tree master plan had. And that map had a little over 30 different zones that broke Morgan Hill up. And for each zone, there was a list. And so what we did was we compiled all those zones and made them into 7 different zones, 7 larger zones. And then after that, I took that map to our local contract arborist firm, and they were able to give me the top 10 species in each new zone that I had. And so then I was able to create a list of trees for each zone that were very similar in structure and other characteristics. And so then after I got all that together, I created a tree expert subcommittee from our Urban Forest Advisory Group to get professional advice on species suitable for each different spacing category in Morgan Hill. And their recommendations were to plant native and non-native species, drought-tolerant species, have diversity that will decrease widespread pest and disease problems, have low root damage ratings, and also have resilient species to urban conditions. So overall, the Master Street Tree Plan, if approved, will be a part of the 40-year Urban Forest Management Plan and will be a working document that will aid the different city departments when addressing things such as new trees to plant in development projects, recommending a replacement tree to residents or developers, planting trees in parks, and planting trees in empty planter strips. So that is all I have for now, and if you have any questions or comments, we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you.
You can stay up there.
Yeah. Stay here.
Sorry.
That's where the spotlight is, so you have to stay.
I know.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah.
Quick question. First of all, I guess well done on your first presentation.
Thank you.
I'm just, out of curiosity, I'm just wondering what lands a tree in the prohibited street tree list. What kind of things do they have to be up to?
Yeah, so I based our prohibited street tree list on high root damage ratings. So the first website I talked about, the Urban Forest Ecosystems Institute at Cal Poly, they will give you a breakdown of each tree, and then they'll tell you if it has a high root damage rating. And so in Morgan Hill, a huge issue that we're having with street trees specifically is that they're uplifting hardscape and kind of ruining just everything in the surrounding area. And so we were trying to really target only low root damage ratings for our street trees. So if I saw at all that they have a high root damage rating, then they immediately went onto the prohibited street tree list. And then also fruit, like if they were fruit trees, they'll have, they will have, it's like a public safety issue with all the droppings. So I also added those on. And then some are just very large trees and they don't work well in our very small planters strips, which are around 4 feet in width. So those are kind of the parameters of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It was, what's the right term? Fruitless fruit trees?
Yeah.
Like, for example, in my house, I have olive trees, but they're fruitless,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Have you considered, is that part of the consideration or not, or?
Yeah, so there are some trees on here that it's the female tree, they drop fruit, and then the males don't. So if, I forgot which one it was, it's on here, but
Because males
it'll
are so
say-
much more disciplined than females.
Yeah,
so
right?
that's
I guess so. I guess so.
You are opening up a can that you do
Only
not want to be
trees.
opening up.
I'm talking about trees. Trees.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
It's a general question. Do we have some type of, maybe it's an objective or a target for the percentage of the area in Morgan Hill that would be covered with the shade of trees? And if we do, how did we develop that?
Yeah, so so before we didn't have any goals or targets.
And can I just interject one thing? To be clear, that what she's going to describe will be part of our urban forest management plan, the overall plan, not part of the street tree plan, which is why you didn't see it in this work. But she will describe the larger effort.
Okay.
Yeah, so I used a software system called iTree, and that helped me to create a baseline target or baseline data for our canopy, our overall canopy in Morgan Hill. And so from that, I surveyed around 7,500 points to see where we are. And so right now we have about 18% tree canopy cover. And so we met with our Urban Forest Advisory Group, and we kind of figured out a target for, was it every 5 years or 10? Every 5 years. We want to increase by 2% every 5 years. So, yeah.
So what would it what's typical for a city?
We're actually above most cities, and what's typical is, I think, around 5 to 8% canopy cover. So we're a little bit above that, which is good.
Interestingly, the development adds to the canopy cover because we have a long history of requiring trees associated with development. So you might take a green field, an empty field that doesn't have any trees, and you put development in it and you plant a bunch of trees. So it actually, the natural development of the land within the existing city boundaries will, as it develops, will increase the canopy. Not to mention, as trees grow, they get bigger and yeah.
I got two areas. Go ahead. One is we've used trees quite a bit to somewhat mitigate the height of structures. Now I realize that I'm gradually getting used to, I have to wait several years before I see it. But what's the difference between the old street tree plan and the new street tree plan in terms of our ability to mitigate the height of buildings that are built close to the street?
There should be no difference in theory. The big thing that we've done is we've said that if there's a smaller planting strip, you should plant a smaller tree in there. So to some extent in the downtown area, if the planting strip is only 2 feet or 3 feet wide, we shouldn't be planting a huge tree because ultimately it's not going to work anyway. So we need to make room for the trees when we're doing that, whether it's a 6-foot box in the sidewalk that perhaps has benches around it in a downtown area, or other means where there's truly room for the trees to grow.
Now, let me give you an example to help it, because I grew up around the lumber industry, which is a lot of trees, but it's not this kind of trees.
Sure enough.
Right? Douglas fir and pine trees don't fit in what we're trying to accomplish here. But the Depot Street, there where they built those stacked flats, they saved the street trees that were there. And when those, bloom out and do it, they seem to be doing a pretty good job of sort of mitigating the height of that building.
Are those crepe myrtles?
Don't ask me what they are. That's
I'm
why
sorry, I can't recall what they are. Which is a smaller tree.
But it still gets fairly tall,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Not compared to some of the other species, naturally.
Well, it's not a pine forest.
Yeah, but so smaller trees like that, we're still talking about trees that get 20 feet high, even in the smallest of the zones, so.
Okay. The second part is I was glad to see a lot of oak species, some native oaks and some of that. I think we need to really work to improve that, but that requires a much larger area to put them.
Absolutely, and we had a mistake in the draft that went out to you first. That's why you got a replacement, is because we did have some oaks in the 4 to 6 foot planter strips, which in retrospect, that's not what we wanted. We had talked about that and got input not to do that. So they're in the 6 foot and over.
Oh, that's going the wrong direction.
Yes, but well, the wrong direction in terms of if you want more oaks, but it's perhaps the right direction if you want to minimize tree conflicts with pedestrians and vehicles driving by. So we are encouraging them in the medians, as you've seen, where we have that broader area. We've also talked conceptually about, there's only so much real estate, as you guys on the Planning Commission well know. But we've talked about some ideas of getting larger planting strips, which would make oaks possible in those areas. But our typical 4 to 5 foot planting area is not going to be big enough to support an oak.
Yeah, but we have a nice piece of land at Monterey and Old Monterey, right there where the new curve is, that we could have put oaks, I think.
The peninsula, if you will, that comes from the fire station?
Well, it's right in the corner, right? As the street hooked into the project, then come out straight to meet it, right? And there's that big clump of ground right at the edge of the street there that's fairly good sized.
I'm with you. We need to make better use of that land. I have some other thoughts too.
Okay. The other one for me is our intersections really don't have a lot of green at them, right? When you drive through them, and it seems to me that would be a much better area where we could put appropriate plantings that would reduce carbon dioxide in particular, right? Because if you happen to turn on don't use the average miles per gallon indicator, use the instantaneous one. It's a real educational point, right? When you're driving 25, 30 miles an hour between stoplights, it gets up pretty high. But as soon as you hit that stoplight and you're waiting for it, right, that's where all the carbon comes out of the cars at, right? And one of the best ways to eliminate it is get a bunch of green around there. As I was driving down Monterey the other day, I was looking at them. That's where we don't have the green.
You need an auto start car, Joe.
Or a Tesla.
Cut off when they stop, and then they'll start back up when they need to go again. See, that's all.
Yeah, well, or all electric or whatever, but 30 years we'll get there, maybe. Or maybe it'll go the way of high-speed rail.
Naturally, intersection design is a really complex thing, with public safety being the primary goal. We do plant trees somewhat close to intersections, but not typically all the way up to them for visibility purposes, but
but you don't have to do a tree, right? It's groundscape too, works, right? Or we could use more turnabouts, right? Or turning circles.
Roundabouts.
Roundabouts, yeah.
Department, I imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah, except we could put trees in the middle.
No, I am completely on board with you on that.
Okay, go ahead.
Last comment. I've noticed the street trees that have been planted on Yagas Road on the way to my home. It's over on the west side. And I found that the planting of this large row of oak trees was, I thought, a little odd, but they've grown and they've gotten big. I think they're great, with one big exception. And you saw it right after the planting. The wind blows from the west and it just pushed those over. So we now have these really strong oaks that are leaning into the road. I don't know if it'll create any hazard in the future, but they just don't look right. Thought being, because we get so much wind in Morgan Hill, that there really needs to be extra attention on our street trees to get them going straight. And I'm not sure of what you do, but we have some very straight trees and then some that are very blown over. And again, the ones I cited on Yagas are in that category. So I didn't see it in the plan, and I don't know if that would be the appropriate place about ensuring that street trees go straight.
You know, what we can do is in the urban forest management plan, we do have the planting specification, the spec as we call it, in there. And we can look at that. You know, it calls for 2 stakes currently, I believe, and we could look at upping that to 3.
Yeah.
Our city forest, the nonprofit group based in San Jose, when they plant trees, they use a 3-stake system, which probably helps ensure that trees are a little straighter.
Okay, that'd be great.
Well, we can talk to our friends in engineering about updating the specification.
Okay.
All right. I don't have any other comments. Any public comments? Any? No? Really nice job. Quite impressed by the level of research you did.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's
I
terrific.
spent a lot of time
and,
on it.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Yeah.
And the more trees we can plant, the better.
Yeah, definitely. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Or the more we can save.
The more we can save, even better still, right? No, really good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Thanks, Tony.
Is this where we tell her that first-time presenters have to sing? Or
Oh, yeah. I forgot
come
that.
on, Mr. Chairman.
I forgot that.
Come on.
Too late? Good joke,
Close
though,
the
Tony.
item.
Tony was a good joke. The dogs. All right. I think that was the last item, right?
That was the last
Okay.
item.
Any
No notes as of right now. I don't believe we are going to be having a meeting on the 26th. If something changes in the next couple of days, I will email you and let you all know for sure, either way. But right now, we do not have any items. The discussion we had tonight on housing had originally been scheduled for the 26th, but they wanted to do it earlier, and that's why they were here tonight. So
next meeting is what's
March
12th, wasn't it?
Well, let me officially cancel first, just to make sure nothing else comes up as far as discussion or updates. It wouldn't be any action items. It would only be informational if something did pop up.
Okay. All right. Commissioners, any other questions?
So, sorry, quick question then. So theoretically, in our next commission meeting, we could have new commissioners joining us.
Correct. They are going to be doing the interviews on February 20th. And I believe there are either 5 or 6 candidates. And yes, you could have 2 new folks. We would like to get them in for orientation before they appear on the dais. So it's really about scheduling before they show up.
So you have a few weeks to come up with some initiation.
And we
stuff, Mr.
discourage
Chairman.
hazing as a general rule.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
General?
Particularly if
There
staff.
goes to your top ideas.
We just give them the 4 big folders I got when I came in. It's like, what the?
Here you go, read all this.
Read all that.
Oh, we
Right.
do that during their orientation.
That's right.
Here's a bunch of books.
That's
When are
right.
they being interviewed?
I'm sorry?
What
20th.
date is the interview?
February 20th at the council meeting.
Next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Oh, we should go to that.
So I'm assuming the resume will be posted on the
It should be
Dropbox?
part of the packet as typical,
Okay.
unless they've changed process.
Okay, all right. Anything else? All right, meeting.
Ask one question, right? There was the follow-up to the commission, what do we call it? The workshop?
Yes, and so we will be working with our consultant to schedule that once we have the new commissioners on. Because we want it to be not only the follow-up for you all, but a team-building exercise as well to bring you all together as a new team. And so we'll be probably looking at April, depending. So I'll let you all know as soon as we have some ideas about that scheduling.
Great, very good. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.